So we want to talk about sexuality and where does all this anxiety and discomfort come from? And researchers tell us part of it is ignorance. And even though we have a World Wide Web today, the one area that we are still allowed to be ignorant is in the area of sexuality. And it's still considered okay. Secrecy. When I talk to individuals about puberty in grades 6 and 7, I said it's private, but it's not a secret. And they're so surprised that it's not a secret. So we have this cloak of secrecy. And then there's trauma. And yes, there can be major traumas of abuse. But then there's mini traumas too. So I remember being 13, I'm in New York, my grandma, we're lying there sleeping, and I'm just starting to develop, and she's changing, and we're not supposed to be looking. And as we're lying there, and she's changing, and she takes off her shirt, and then she unhooks her bra, and has her breast fall to her navel. That was me at 13, thinking, is that gonna be mine? So that's called a mini trauma. We all have those. Okay? And then what happens is we don't even know why we're triggered and anxious, but it's the mini traumas. It's not necessarily the big ones. Okay? So I'll never forget that because that was a mini trauma. To this day, I can put myself there, So funny. Okay. So what are the important topics to address or surrounding sexuality? So I'm just going to go through these. This is the list, but I'm going to move to the next slide. How to teach appropriate behavior. How do we balance risk and opportunity? And reports say without proper education in these areas, our individuals are at risk for exploitation, poor health, abuse, neglect. They're at risk. And the other part that's challenging is social emotional age. Sometimes what we don't see is that they might be 16 chronologically, but socially they're 8. And they have the sex drive of a 16-year-old, but they want to befriend 8-year-olds with that sex drive. That is a volatile mix. They're not deviant. They're not child molesters. But we do live in a world where that is the definition that they fall under. So I see individuals who are 13, they're already considered an offender, 13, 8 years old emotionally. They've touched some child's private parts, and it becomes a legal issue. Offender's a strong word when we know that they have a profile that leads to that kind of behavior. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't call them offenders. I'm just saying that they fall into a system where, yikes, we've kind of moved from healthy sexuality and how to learn about it to one where it becomes about trying to prevent abuse when they don't even know what they did. Okay? So yes, their growing sex drive is not accompanied by a corresponding know-how about how to be with people. So education for caregivers. Now, it's supposed to be 75% home, 25% school. But you may find it's more 50-50, or sometimes school's doing the work. Ideally, parents are the best socio-sexual educators of their children, whether we intend to be or not. So I'm just going to move on here a little bit. Sexual abuse, David Hinsberger talks about there's 2 ways we can deal with our young people with challenges. We can put them in the prison of protection, he calls it, where we protect them from all the information, relationships, decision-making. We just limit it. They're in the basement, they're playing video games, they never come out, they don't need sex ed. And I'm not kidding, people tell me that. And then we move to the ring of safety and support, where they get awareness, they learn about privacy, they learn about rights, self-concept, all those kinds of things. And then, of course, an area that we find challenging is called self-pleasuring, or masturbation. It's a natural part of sexual behavior from individuals of all ages. So our individuals go through puberty, they have the same drive, they're looking at ways to deal with the feelings, they may not be in an intimate relationship for some time, and they need to find ways to release, and so it comes down to something like self-pleasuring. And sometimes they even need to be taught they need to be taught where and where not, but they also sometimes need to be taught how, so they're not hurting or injuring themselves. That doesn't have to happen at school necessarily, but it still needs to happen somewhere. That's where I come in sometimes. So this gentleman, his name is Armand. He has autism. He's going to tell parents about why it's so important, or other people, to talk about self-pleasure. So here we go. And you're going to see the nuances of autism when he speaks. Here he is. So, we watched the video about masturbation. That topic has such a loaded history to it when we go back to the 1800s when they thought people were insane and people got jailed. And even though we've come so much to the forefront, it's still in the shadows and we can feel it. So thank you for being open to that conversation.